My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the big issues of the day that need looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table over the next 2 hours and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is the glorious Sean Bailey, the former Conservative London mayoral candidate. And here's what we've got coming up on the show. A plea from the Ukraine president for more support. He's addressed the G7 summit, urging world leaders for more help with grain exports as well as military aid. Plus, crime doesn't pay. Well, not according to barristers who have walked out on strike in a dispute over legal aid. And we're heading to SW19, where the best of British Raducanu, Murray, Strawberries and, of course, Q's are all on show. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines. Good afternoon. It's just 2 minutes past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. G7 leaders meeting in Germany say they'll continue working together to meet Ukraine's needs for military and defence equipment. Well, this morning there was an address by the Ukrainian president via video link in which he asked for help with grain exports, reconstruction and military aid. EU diplomats say Volodymyr Zelensky also said he wants to end the war before winter sets in. Speaking from Bavaria, Boris Johnson told broadcasters President Zelensky has no option but to continue to defend his country from Russian aggression.
There is no deal that the President Zelensky can really do. So in those circumstances, the G7 supporters of Ukraine around the world have to continue to help the Ukrainians to rebuild their economy, to get their grain out, to export their grain. And, of course, we have to help them to protect themselves.
The government's being urged to invest more money than is currently planned in levelling up the country. A report by the Resolution Foundation says income per person in the richest part of the country is 4.5 times higher than in the poorest part. The think tank says the key to closing the gap is to boost productivity, but it will be challenging and expensive. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove told us the recent by-election results show the government needs to do more.
Result in Wakefield is a reminder to us that we need to move further and faster on levelling up. We should be thinking about policies that help all parts of the United Kingdom. So if it is the case that we strengthen economic growth and productivity in the North, the Midlands and the South West, that takes some of the pressure off the green fields of the South East and the public services in the South East.
Barristers have gathered outside courts across England and Wales as thousands strike over legal aid funding. They're refusing to accept new cases or to step in for colleagues whose cases are overrunning. Some Crown courts have today been forced to run limited services, with criminal trials and other cases postponed or rescheduled. The Justice Secretary Dominic Raab says the strikes will only delay justice for victims. QC Richard Atkins, head of Chambers at St Phillips, read out a statement saying the government's guilty of neglect.
Our system of justice, which is the envy of the world, gradually over time has become starved of resources. Those who practice in crime are treated with contempt by government. Now the very future of our criminal justice system is in jeopardy. It has been abandoned and neglected for far too long.
Leaders in Scotland have been looking at ways to tackle an increase in protests outside abortion clinics. Scottish Green MSP Gillian Mackay has proposed a bill to put a 150-metre buffer zone outside clinics, aiming to prevent what she describes as intimidation and harassment. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says today's event is an important opportunity to reaffirm women's autonomy and the right to choose. Our reporter Davy Donaldson is at the summit. Davy, a very good afternoon to you. Just tell us what's been discussed so far.
Yeah, that's right. Nicola Sturgeon met with leaders of Back Off Scotland, BPAS, and Rape Crisis Scotland, and this is about buffer zones around clinics. I know that at a clinic in Glasgow there's been a number of incidents where women have felt intimidated while going for an abortion. So, yeah, that's the way she spoke to those groups today, and she was pretty clear about her position.
I am very strongly pro a woman's right to choose, but I understand that people take a different view. But actually this is not just about that. This is about access to healthcare. We wouldn't tolerate for any other kind of healthcare people as they enter a hospital or a clinic being subject to intimidation and harassment, and we shouldn't tolerate it, in my view, for women accessing abortion services.
Davy, thank you.
Nicola Sturgeon there making her position very, very clear, and but one of our MPs, MSP John Mason, says he's not convinced there's a real need for them.
Davy, thank you very much. Apologies for interrupting. Now, still in Scotland, the Queen has travelled to Scotland for the royal family's traditional week of events. Her Majesty took part in the ceremony of the Keys at the Palace of Holyrood House, accompanied by the Earl and the Countess of Wessex. She was symbolically offered the key to the city of Edinburgh, but returned it, as tradition dictates, to be looked after by the city's elected officials. This is GB News and you're up to date. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to Alex for today's We Need to Talk About. The great and the good, or should that be the good, the bad and the ugly of the world's 7 biggest economies are meeting in the Bavarian Alps to put the world to right. The leaders of America, Germany, France, Italy, Canada, Japan and the UK, and of course those 2 toadies from the EU, have posed for their tie-less white shirt team photo like a synth opera album cover before they discuss the big issues of the day. And at the top of the list will be Ukraine and the smorgasbord of horrific real-world ramifications of a conflict now threatening global food supplies and triggering an energy crisis, the likes of which hasn't been seen in decades, threatening to obliterate most of the world's economic stability. So, pretty big business to contend with this year, meaning the climate crisis has pretty much had to do one. Meanwhile, Putin has taken the opportunity to remind the world he isn't going anywhere by simultaneously dropping bombs on Ukraine's capital once again, while Zelensky made a video link appeal to the power ensemble to help him end the war by winter. Make no mistake, there's nothing they want more. But to make it a reality, they know the sacrifices that would need to be made and extreme economic pain that would have to be endured to inflict the same on Moscow. And so war rumbles on. Whether the G7 can unlock a critical solution remains to be seen, but it would need some kind of miracle. Well, Ukraine is, of course, top of the agenda for those attending the summit. And this morning, the president has asked G7 leaders to provide more military aid.
This stage of war is spiritually difficult and emotionally difficult. We don't have a sense of how long it will last, how many more blows, losses and efforts will be needed before we see victory is on the horizon. The sanctions packages against Russia are not enough. We need more military assistance for Ukraine. And the air defence systems, the modern systems that our partners have, should not be at training grounds or in storage, but in Ukraine, where they are needed now.
And Boris Johnson has backed that call for more military aid to Ukraine. Speaking from Bavaria, Boris told broadcasters that he also backed Zelensky's plea for more help with grain exports.
there is no deal that the President Zelensky can really do. So in those circumstances, the G7 supporters of Ukraine around the world have to continue to help the Ukrainians to rebuild their economy, to get their grain out, to export their grain, and of course we have to help them to protect themselves.
Well, GB News' Paul Hawkins is at the summit, so let's go to him live now and get the latest. What has been on the agenda and what sort of things are coming out of that summit?
Yeah, pretty much everything you've just been saying, Alex. I mean, we heard from Volodymyr Zelensky there, and he's calling for help with reconstruction in Ukraine, asking for anti-aircraft systems, heavy weaponry. He wants more sanctions for Russia, and he says that he wants the war to be over by winter time, and that if you, the West, the G7, if you provide what we need, then it'll be over by the winter. So that's what they're hoping. I mean, the G7 leaders, there was a little bit of talk about some voices in Europe, in France and Germany, talking about potentially a deal between Ukraine and Russia that would cede territory to Russia, and in return the conflict would be over quickly, and that one reason for perpetuating world inflation would be eliminated. But the G7 appear to be very united at the moment. Of course, we don't know how long this war is going to go on for, so unity very much the theme today. We saw the big group photo earlier with all of them standing there. Boris Johnson not really chatting to anyone particularly on the far right. Emmanuel Macron very tactile with the Indian President Narendra Modi. India, Indonesia, Argentina, Senegal and South Africa, the guests that have been invited by the host nation Germany. So that's what they've been talking about today. We've also had talk about sanctions. We know that the UK, the US, Japan and Canada are introducing a ban on Russian imports of gold. They're also looking at a price cap for Russian oil, and also possibly looking at potentially using the money from higher trade tariffs on Russian imports to fund aid in Ukraine, which would be quite a novel way of financially helping the Ukrainians. So that's what they're talking about in the pipeline at the moment, but the discussion's ongoing at the moment. And interestingly, actually, earlier there was some talk about the G20 as well in November in Indonesia. The EU and Germany ruling out not attending or saying that neither way, whether they were going to sit out that summit or not. Vladimir Putin has been invited by Indonesia to that G20 summit in November. So that's going to be very interesting, with Vladimir Putin around the table and possibly everyone else, including the EU and Germany. So that's interesting. And by the way, we should add as well, Volodymyr Zelensky has been invited by the Indonesians to that summit. So that certainly is one thing to look out for come November time.
Paul, thank you very much. Well summarised there. Well, joining me now is Dr. Stefan Stepanenko, who's a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Dr. Stepanenko, I mean, the problem we have here, isn't it, that, you know, we have countries like India invited and South Africa invited to that summit, while Western leaders are talking about price caps, even putting tariffs on fuel from Russia, which would be massive costs handed down to the general public. Countries like India are guzzling it up at cut price, essentially continuing to fund the war. I mean, what can be done?
We have to remember that at the same time, countries like Germany continue buying Russian oil, Russian gas, and in fact, the money paid to Russia for those fossil fuels far exceeds what the West has given Ukraine. So it's not just India, it's European countries who are responsible for directly funding Russia at the moment.
I mean, they talk about unity, don't they? And unity is clearly what's needed. It seems to me there's just a drip of sanctions, and every time Russia gets given the time to respond, essentially just prolonging the misery. And now we've got an argument shaping up between America and the UK, with Boris Johnson saying it's desperately needed that biocrop land is turned over for growing food crops with the blockade of grain from Ukraine, and America being protectionist and saying this is going to hurt American farmers.
Well, Ukraine is rightly known to be the breadbasket of Europe and indeed the world, as it turned out. Putin using grain export and restriction of grain export from Ukraine is bringing the fight to Europe, to Britain, to America directly. And more than harming the American farmers, this is harming the European economy, the world economy, and this needs to be dealt with directly.
But how can this be dealt with directly? The problem, it seems, that Putin's priced in these divisions, and the so-called unity seems little more than a photo shoot and a PR exercise when it comes to Germany delivering the big weapons that they've promised, when it comes to telling Macron to do one, when he starts talking about appeasing Putin, essentially capitulating over territory. There isn't really any unity, is there? And that's the problem.
Unity is something that needs to be gained, definitely, but at the moment, Britain and America are way ahead of other European states, and this is perhaps something that needs to carry on. Britain and America needs to arm Ukraine to allow it to open the ports, to protect the grain ships that leave Ukraine, and to protect the Ukrainian population. We have to remember that yesterday, there was a strike on a high-rise residential building and a children's nursery in Kiev, the most protected area of Ukraine. We need to arm them.
And Putin's clearly trying to send a message, isn't he? Essentially bombing Kiev, which he hasn't done for months, at the very same time that Zelensky is making that appeal to world leaders. He's trolling the G7 right now, isn't he?
It's very well timed with the G7 summit. It also can be seen as a delayed retaliation for Ukrainian attacks on the Zmyny Island in the Black Sea, which is Ukrainian territory. It's occupied by Russia. So, yes, in both cases, Putin is playing a political game, but unfortunately with weapons that kill people.
I mean, if we cannot encourage some of the Western European leaders to do more, and of course they have to price in the impact it's going to have on their people at home, they're far more reliant on Russian energy than we are. I mean, how can Britain, by itself, with the help of America, actually continue to face down Putin? It can't, can it?
No, Britain can. Definitely can, and it has done very well. It's well ahead on the sanctions compared to European countries. It's well ahead on the arms that are provided to Ukraine. And Ukrainians see that. There's popular support for Boris Johnson, and that is the reason why. Because Britain has contributed far more, and it seems will continue to contributing far more, supporting Ukrainian efforts against Russia.
Dr. Stefan Stepanenko, thank you so much for coming on, Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Well, my studio guest today is Sean Bailey, former Conservative candidate for London Mayor and member of the London Assembly. Sean, I mean, yet again, an expert there from the UK. We've had them from all over the world saying that Britain is the vanguard here. Britain is leading the way. We are doing far more than the other countries. And there we are, all gathered at the G7. It doesn't seem like Britain's getting the plaudits it deserves.
Well, what you see is a Europe that's confused. On one hand, they make all the right noises, or send the weapons, or send the troops, or do the sanctions, but when it comes to it, they're not actually following through. And Ukraine are right, they need to win this war by the winter, because the longer the war goes on, the more Russia will win. Russia are expert at wars of attrition. Ukraine cannot stand up to Russia too much longer.
But that's the other thing. We need this done by winter, because that's when things like the sanctions on energy imports from Russia are really going to bite at home, aren't they? That's going to send energy prices through the roof at a time when people need to heat their homes.
But this is what we see. We're all linked around the world. So Europe, really, what they don't want to do is rock the boat. Germany, if you think we're dependent, they've got Germany by the short and curlies, to put it colloquially. They need to make a step now. What you'll see, though, when they go to the G20 summit, I think we should attend. Everybody should attend. That is a point where we turn the world to make them look at the Ukraine and say, what are you doing to support Ukraine? Because if we can't get everybody on board, Russia will just get the war financed by the rest of the world. And of course, there's this idea about the grain ships. We need the grain, that's the rest of the world. So let's support those ships, send a message to Russia that we will take military steps to make that happen as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the G20 and the fact that it's vital for us to attend that. But we actually have other world leaders at the G7. You know, there was reports of Macron typically pouring up a world leader in the form of Modi this time. And India's supposed to be a very strong partner of the UK. But it's India who, in many respects, is leading the way in getting fuel at a massive cut price from Russia.
Well, let's look at the two things. If you the French have always been very good at arguing their case. They're not particularly concerned, it would seem, particularly Macron, about what the outcome in the Ukraine. He just wants what he wants, which is to stand back and have things continue the way they are. India, on the other hand, well, it's a European war. It's none of their business. And if someone offers them a vital product, oil, at a cut rate price, they'll take it with both hands. That's why the G20 summit becomes really important, because that's when you get the face-to-face conversation with India to say, we have a relationship, we need to end this war in Europe, you're a vital part of that, please do that, here's how we move together as a world.
Yeah, Sean, thank you. Brilliant comments there. What are your views on this? GBviews at gbnews.uk. You are with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, barristers walk out in a strike over pay. We'll be speaking to one of the UK's youngest on why they're taking that action. Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. A mix of sunshine and showers today, with the showers mostly this afternoon across the east, with a cool breeze for most parts of the UK. Low pressure is dominating this weather front, bringing the showers today, but more lurking out in the Atlantic. They'll bring more wet weather to western areas tomorrow. But for the time being, the rain is clearing from the west. Some heavy downpours earlier for northwest England and southwest Scotland, but turning a bit drier here this afternoon. Not completely dry, still 1 or 2 showers, but the main focus for showers, of course, eastern England and northeast Scotland, where some heavy, thundery downpours are possible. Much of South Wales, southwest England, Northern Ireland, dry and bright through the afternoon, but not particularly warm. We could just squeak into the low 20s across the east. Quite a cool breeze, especially on western coasts. The showers in the east will keep going well into the evening across Aberdeenshire, Norfolk too, but tending to clear away, and then that next weather system that we saw earlier pushes in from the west, turning into a pretty wet night for Northern Ireland and a very wet start to Tuesday across western parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, for England and Wales, mostly dry through the night and turning quite cool across central and eastern England, with temperatures down to single figures. But plenty of sunshine here to start Tuesday. Much of eastern England will have a fine, bright and quite warm day tomorrow, whereas it's going to be a very wet start for Northern Ireland. The rain only slowly clearing here and lingering for much of the day in southwest Scotland. That rain could cause a few issues as it really builds up through the day. Turning wet in West Wales and the far southwest of England as well. And again, cool in the west, quite warm in the east, where we see the lengthiest spells of sunshine. That rain will continue to only trickle its way further eastwards as we head through Tuesday evening, and it's tied into an area of low pressure. You can see there the swirls of showers moving around that, and that's what we're in for during Wednesday and Thursday. Some heavy showers across the UK, turning a bit drier, certainly across the south for Friday and into the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Backlog Britain bites again, this time in the courts of law as barristers follow transport workers on national strikes. Barristers, I hear you cry, those bewigged barons of the legal world in their Beamers and their Bentleys. There they are, dressed like medieval courtiers, festooned in robes with horsehair headrugs, complaining about cash. Well, for those starting out, taking on grim cases in the criminal courts, the pay is actually pretty rubbish and comes in the form of legal aid, government-backed funding, so everyday victims and toe rags can have justice served. And that pay hasn't increased in 25 years, while the logjam of cases yet to be heard has been made worse by the pandemic and is now up to around 3 years. Striking is hardly going to solve that. But you have to ask, with the court system in such dire straits, denying victims of rape, fraud and assault the right to see the offender punished, how the government yet managed to wang millions in legal aid to immigration lawyers to fight, the government itself, to prove that the government's migrant plan doesn't work. Well, joining me now is Grace Rose Gwynn, one of the youngest barristers in the UK. Grace, great to have you on. A lot of people watching this don't have sympathy for barristers because they all imagine you lot are coining it and have a wonderful life. So can you explain why it is barristers are going on strike and why we should be sympathetic?
I think that's the issue, is that people have this stereotype that all barristers make a load of money each year. And the reality is far from that. The reality is that criminal practitioners, of which I'm no longer a criminal practitioner, often only make around £12,000 per year for the first 3 years of their practice. And on top of that, they're expected to work these lengthy hours in court. That doesn't include travel, which is often hours each side of the commute, and hours of preparation in order to do their client justice and prepare a well-prepared case for their client. And that the pay they get is minimal because it's normally fixed fees. You know, it might be £88 for a day's work plus travel plus preparation. And the reality is it's not a sustainable way to live. And barristers are asking the government to listen to what they're saying in regards to it's not easy to live like that. And I stand with my criminal colleagues in that regard. And I see on your VT there, I recognise a lot of these people outside because that's in Birmingham. That's the Crown Court, my home Crown Court. And I stand with the concerns they have. And it's about time that we all sort of muster together so that the government can listen to what these barristers are saying. It's not just bluff and blunder. It's the reality on the ground.
A lot of people might say, well, you're a clever bunch, you've priced that in. You know the starting salary when you begin in the profession and know that the likelihood is you're going to leave that element of the profession and go on to make big bucks elsewhere. Is that at the crux of the problem as well and why we have such a big backlog? Because barristers don't want to work in the criminal sector.
Well, that's the problem as well, is that it's putting off a lot of young practitioners from joining the criminal bar, and we're losing talented barristers because people look at the average salary, they look at the hours of work involved, and they look at their home circumstances, mortgages, rent, bills, what have you, and they do the maths, and it's not sustainable without taking out other loans or having a partner that can supplement that income. And so, yes, we are having a lot of juniors that are put off from joining the criminal bar because of these very real circumstances.
There are a lot of other people who'll be watching this who also think they might fancy going on strike. Doctors, teachers, lots of other people in the public sector who, you know, because they're funded by the government, can actually call the government to account when they don't have pay that matches an increase in living costs. But surely the profession itself can find a way to deal with this, because those at the top of your profession certainly have enough money to help those at the bottom.
It's a very small minority at the top of the profession. It's the vast majority that are feeling the impact of this. And it's not that criminal practitioners are going on strike once a year or twice a year. The last strike was in 2014. You know, these are unprecedented times before you even take into account the cost of living increasing. And so it shows how important and how much they want to push that message, that it's really desperate times for the criminal bar. And so it's not something that happens on a daily occurrence. It's something that it's happened twice. And the reason it's happened is because they really want to push a message to the government to say, help us, realise our daily experience and what you're asking us to do, especially in the event that nowadays, the job's even more demanding. And so it's about time that they're reflected for that hard work that they put into these cases.
Grace, thank you so much. That's Grace Rose Gwynn, one of the youngest barristers in the UK. Well, let's go back to my guest today, Sean Bailey. Sean, do you know what? Out of all the people on strike, it's the barristers I have most sympathy with. But what's your view on this?
So there's two things I'd say. I think we really do need to get this right, because what drives crime more than anything else is the idea that you will not get caught. And obviously you need your day in court. That needs barristers. But what's troubling me with all this strike action, we keep hearing the government. The government haven't got a penny. It's all our money. It's taxpayers' money. And we as a country need to have a realistic conversation about public services. You sound very good when you're on telly saying, let's give more money to the public services, our precious public service workers. That's fine, but we're fast approaching the point where we'll have to make a choice. If you stopped most people in the street, they wouldn't have any idea of just how vast our public services is and just how lopsided it is. So if you take one of those junior barristers and compare them to a tube driver, for instance, the gulf is massive in pay. I wonder what people would think, who's more important. You look at what junior nurses get, what early police officers get in their career. We need to weigh these things up. And the other thing that I think is a real challenge for us is pensions. We have been giving public sector pensions at a far larger rate historically, because we've basically said your pay's slightly lower, but we'll catch you back up with a pension. Well, now, with the state pension going the way it is, the size of that pension bomb and the fact that most people in the public sector, the high end of the public sector, get paid the same wages as in the commercial sector, but with a much better pension, we need to have a realistic conversation about the services we want in this country and what we're prepared to pay for them.
Sean, thanks once again. Well spoken, as always. I want to know your views. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Do you have sympathy with those barristers on just over 12 grand a year to work more than 40 hours a week, basically having to defend toe rags? Important for the victims, though. Do get in touch so I know what you guys really think. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Coming up, as Americans take to the streets in protest over changes to abortion law, I'll be debating the issue with a pro-life campaigner and a women's rights activist. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. G7 leaders meeting in Germany say they'll continue working together to meet Ukraine's needs for military and defence equipment. It comes after an address by the Ukrainian president via video link in which he asked for help with grain exports, reconstruction and military aid. EU diplomats say Volodymyr Zelensky also said he wants to end the war before winter sets in. NATO will increase the number of its forces at high readiness from 40,000 to over 300,000. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg confirmed this to reporters ahead of a NATO summit in Madrid later this week. He also says he expects allies to state that Russia poses a direct threat to security and the rules-based international order. Barristers have gathered outside courts across England and Wales as they strike over legal aid funding. They're refusing to accept new cases or to step in for colleagues whose cases are overrunning. The Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, says the strikes are regrettable and will only delay justice for victims. A summit's taking place in Scotland to look at ways to tackle an increase in protests outside abortion clinics. Scottish Green MSP Gillian Mackay has proposed a bill to put a 150-metre buffer zone outside of clinics, aiming to prevent protesters' intimidation and harassment. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says the event is an important opportunity to reaffirm women's autonomy and the right to choose. The Queen has travelled to Scotland for the royal family's traditional week of events. Her Majesty took part in the ceremony of the keys at the Palace of Holyrood House, accompanied by the Earl and Countess of Wessex. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy $1.227 and 1.160 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,494.67 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest, and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It sucks to be a woman in America right now. On one hand, your country applauds the extreme objectification of your body with their Kardashian culture, misogynist rap and porn on tap. Then on the other, they want to let any old geezer call himself a woman and come into your loo. Now, Uncle Sam has decided you don't get a say over your own body in the event of getting pregnant. The reversal of the historic Roe versus Wade ruling that gave women the legal right to a termination has sent shockwaves across America and the West. Now, it will be decided on a state-by-state basis whether a woman can access the service, plunging millions of women in the so-called free world into an oblivion of choice if they happen to be living in the wrong bit of America. For the country that spent $1 trillion fighting the Taliban, they seem to be massively dropping the ball when it comes to women's rights at home. Well, joining me now is Angela Madden from the Tennessee Rights to Life campaign group, which supports a ban on abortion, and the Irish-American writer Jenny Holland, who supports women's rights to choose an abortion. Where do I start with this? Angela, let's start with you. Do you think that, there's a real moral justification for this, or can you see that for some women this is going to really be devastating?
I appreciate the question because I'd say, yes, there is very much a moral discussion that needs to occur and a moral justification, because we believe that every human being, and we know that an unborn child is a human being, has rights, and those rights need to be protected, which means that we need to protect the rights of the mother and the child.
But when you go down the route of an unborn thing being a human being, at what point do you stop? I mean, do you go full Catholic when it comes to contraception and things like that? And surely if there is a woman out there who cannot give that child a decent life, whose child might have been created out of a horrific, violent crime, who might be medically affected when it comes to seeing through the birth of their child, surely at some point that must take precedent.
Well, I would say that the argument here is no longer about if it's a child. We know from science that from the moment of conception, that's a brand new human being, full DNA, full chromosomes, full blueprint. They have never existed before. They will never exist again. And even the justices who wrote the dissent said that you couldn't force a woman to give birth to a child. So they recognize that it's a child as well. So if we get on this slippery slope of deciding that one group's rights are more important than another, that's a very frightening place to be.
Going to you, Jenny Holland, I mean, for a lot of women out there, America must be a very frightening place to be, because it seems at one side it's a highly sexualized society, and at the other, if you end up on the wrong side of that, then you're stuck. You don't have any choice about what to do with your future of you or your unborn child.
Yeah, there's something to that. I think America is undergoing some kind of decades-long moral and social crisis that just seems to get worse with each passing year. I mean, I am pro-choice. I have always been pro-choice. However, I am not mourning the demise of Roe v. Wade for a multitude of reasons. One of them being that it does not ban abortion wholesale. It simply puts the matter back to each state legislature to decide. In practice, that does mean that quite a few states will be banning abortion imminently, but if that reflects the will of the people, then so be it. And likewise, a lot of states have done the opposite, and they will enshrine the right of a woman to choose in their state legislatures. I find that to be a more acceptable position politically and morally, democratically, than having the judges decide from on high, even if it was a ruling that I so-called agreed with. But I think also, to me, there's something else that's very important here, and that is that the pro-choice movement in the United States has become unmoored from reality, and I think that they deserve this defeat, quite frankly.
But when you talk about, there are states that will ban abortion, some states won't, does that not potentially put abortion in the hands of those who can afford to travel? At the end of the day, getting from the middle of, southern American states to somewhere that might legalize or maintain abortion as legal is a bit like flying across Europe. It's not necessarily quick or cheap.
Well, it's not. Unfortunately, this is the reality that many women and young women especially will face. And I'm not afraid to say that I was once in that position when I was a university student living in the Republic of Ireland, where abortion was illegal at the time, and I traveled to England to terminate an unwanted and accidental pregnancy. I was a university student. I had no means. I still figured it out. I don't mean to sound callous, but I think that if you want to maintain a sensible, common sense, humane policy for all parties involved, you have to reject what is passing for the feminist movement and the pro-choice movement today. I'm sorry, but choosing late-term abortion as the hill to die on, which is what brought this case about, which is why Roe v. Wade has been overturned, because the abortion clinic in Mississippi decided that it would fight back against a 15-week abortion ban, which also had exceptions for the health of the mother. I think that if that's your path you're going to take, you are really opening yourself up to ultimate destruction in terms of your moral high ground. You don't have a leg to stand on. You also don't have a leg to stand on because we just watched a few months ago the new Supreme Court justice pretend she couldn't define what a woman was because she is not a, quote, biologist. So really, the progressive left needs to really seriously reassess itself, and I'm sure it will not, because I think it's too ideologically deranged at this point to even admit its own mistakes and overreaches. But really, I mean, whilst there are going to be some young women who will lose out in certain states, a lot of those states it was already very hard to obtain an abortion. So I don't think that's going to be the main problem. The main problem here is the United States has completely lost sight of any common sense discourse over what is a morally acceptable way to terminate a pregnancy. And that does exist. That does exist. A woman's right to self-determination must include a right to terminate a pregnancy up until a certain point, but it is not 15 weeks, and it is not for any old reason, and it is not to be celebrated. We really have to be mature, wise women and take control of the discourse back.
I mean, Angela, Jenny makes some interesting points there about what socially is happening in America. And it seems to me that it's polarizing into two very extreme camps, with the extreme liberal left in one point throwing decades of women's rights in the bin over trans rights and things like that, in a hypersexualized society. And then at one end, making decisions to stop abortion being legal in a lot of states, which has shocked a lot of the Western world, who find that pretty anachronistic. What is going on, do you think, with America?
I would say that public opinion should never drive constitutional law and human rights. And of course, I was grateful that the Supreme Court said that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion and did put it back to the states and to the people. That's what we were founded on. And you will see different states make different decisions. And they did this for this decision because the stakes are so high. We are talking about life and death. We're not talking about something like the right to vote or the right to own property. We are talking about a human being and their ability to be born, even if their mother doesn't want them.
Angela Madden, Jenny Holland, thank you so much both for coming on and debating this sensitive but critical issue. Really do appreciate your time. Well, Sean Bailey is still with me. Sean, what's your take on this?
Firstly, if you're at home watching this now, praise the Lord for GB News. Because this is the only place that you'll hear that type of information, a very reasoned debate, a very nuanced debate about what's going on in America. And it's very interesting to hear both your guests saying, actually, there is some room for an abortion, there is some room for maybe not having an abortion. I think that's a very important point, because it brings me to the conclusion that what's wrong with the Western world is we've abandoned all common sense. It's interesting that politicians who cannot identify a woman are then able to say, well, a woman can have an abortion. It means that we should have a look at ourselves, we should have a look at what we're talking about in the Western world. And the debate those two women have just had has really just focused again, what rights do we have? Where do these rights come from? And how do we exercise them? Here in Europe, I think if we're not careful, particularly in this country, again, a country that has lacked the ability to identify what a woman is, remember, the leader of the opposition could not tell people what a woman is. I think at some point we may well be having this debate as well. I would take it that as a rule, Europeans, particularly British people, are probably more liberal, so we'd come down on a different side of the debate, but we do need to be able to have much more serious, grown-up, focused, nuanced debates, and this is a huge example of that.
Oh, well, thank you, Sean. I couldn't agree more. It's all become rather cartoonish, hasn't it, over in America? Well, it's that time of year again when the most quintessential of English sports tournaments starts. Strawberries and cream, Pims, the art of queuing, and the inevitable rain causing Cliff Richard to resurrect to bring cheer to tutting crowds. Yes, it's Wimbledon. But this year, the fight is less about skirt length and the decibels of unsightly grunts, but whether the competition was right to ban players from Russia and Belarus. Well, as long as someone disapproves of something, it's still tennis the English way. So a fortnight of exciting tennis beckons as the Wimbledon Championships returns to full capacity for the first time in 3 years. What can we expect from this year's championship? And most importantly, how are the Brits looking? Joining us now is our reporter, Ellie Costello. Ellie, is the excitement building?
Alex, let me tell you, there's a real buzz outside the tennis courts right now. You might be able to hear the roaring and the clapping from the crowds. They are so happy to be back to full capacity for the first time in 3 years. Of course, Wimbledon was cancelled in 2020 down to the pandemic. In 2021, it was down to about 50% capacity. But today, you could see the crowds queuing in the most spectacular form this morning. Many of them had their picnic blankets, their newspapers out. They were already sipping on their Pims. It truly was a very British sight. So lots of people very, very happy to be back today. Novak Djokovic is currently on centre court. He is obviously defending his title. He's just won that first set against Kwon Son Woo. They're playing their second set now. And following that, we're going to see Emma Raducanu on centre court. Lots of eyes on her. Still only 19 years old. So I was talking to people this morning. Lots of people saying there's still lots to come from Emma Raducanu. And later on into the evening, we're going to be seeing Sir Andy Murray on the centre court. So it's a fantastic day for the Brits. 9 British tennis players playing today, so lots to look forward to. But this morning in that queue, I was talking to people about what they were most looking forward to on day 1 of the Wimbledon Championships.
Yeah, Wimbledon, of course. It's just such a big tournament, and it's so so exclusive. It's good to be part of that.
This is my Andy Murray hat. It's been on the go since 2013. I just love the whole atmosphere. It's just lovely. Just love the place. It's just been coming every year since 2013, apart from 2. I've missed 2 since then. So.
And what's it like to be back after the coronavirus?
Oh, it's lovely to have normal life back.
So we came all the way from Poland. We came, 5 a.m.? Yes. 5 a.m., yes.
And this is a present to your dad, isn't it?
It is. Do you like your present?
Yes, I think this is very for me. I was very happy because my son remember every year of my birthday. And this day, I was 60 years old, and it's very nice. The best gift for me in my life.
British style, the heavens have just opened at Wimbledon, which, as you said, was almost made it quintessentially British. Oh, and a roll of thunder as well. So, I mean, we can't expect anything less, can we, on day one of Wimbledon? But these championships are not without their controversy. As you mentioned, Russian and Belarusian players have been banned from this year's championship. That has caused controversies. Sir Andy Murray, Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic, they've all criticised that ban. They said that this shouldn't impact on the individual players. But for the most part, Alex, people are looking forward to 10 days of spectacular tennis after being away for 3 years.
Thank you so much for that, Els. You better scuttle off and go find yourself some shelter before you get drenched. Our very own Ellie Costello there. Let's go back to Sean Bailey, Conservative member of the London Assembly. This is a great event for London, isn't it? I mean, love those Vox Pops. Americans looking super fly, you know, exclusive event. The British looking a little bit batty. It showcases the best of British, not just on the court, but off it as well, doesn't it?
Wimbledon is a wonderful thing. It's a peculiar mix of traditional, eccentric English goings-on, but also a very modern, well-organised, well-televised event. And it's really great to see just how behind a particular player, particularly if they're British, the public can get. It almost reminds me of the World Cup. We have been so desperate to have somebody win Wimbledon. We throw everything at it. And I think it's just part of the... It feels cosy and small, and at the same time, it's a really big international goings-on, which I think really represents London well. And I like the fact that it's an event that's run with all the tradition. If you exist outside of the UK, people often look at us as very stalwart, very, very conservative. We run things in a particular way, and I think Wimbledon does that and still manages to modernise. And as for the banning of Russian players, I actually think it's probably the wrong thing to do. If you're a Russian tennis star, you had absolutely no sort of influence over the mad goings-on of Putin. And I think while you're not representing Russia, you should be allowed to play. If there's a Russian team, I think there's scope for a discussion. But when it's a Russian individual, I think we probably should have let them play.
Yeah, I think we're the only competition to have done that, aren't we?
Yeah.
Sean, thank you for that. Well, coming up after the break, I'll have a run through some of today's other stories that we need to talk about in The Update. But first, let's get a check on the weather forecast. Thunder in London, apparently.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. A mix of sunshine and showers today, with the showers mostly this afternoon across the east, with a cool breeze for most parts of the UK. Low pressure is dominating this weather front, bringing the showers today, but more lurking out in the Atlantic. They'll bring more wet weather to western areas tomorrow. But for the time being, the rain is clearing from the west. Some heavy downpours earlier for northwest England and southwest Scotland, but turning a bit drier here this afternoon. Not completely dry, still 1 or 2 showers, but the main focus for showers was eastern England and northeast Scotland, where some heavy thundery downpours are possible. Much of South Wales, southwest England, Northern Ireland, dry and bright through the afternoon, but not particularly warm. We could just squeak into the low 20s across the east. Quite a cool breeze, especially on western coasts. The showers in the east will keep going well into the evening across Aberdeenshire, Norfolk too, but tending to clear away, and then that next weather system that we saw earlier pushes in from the west, turning into a pretty wet night for Northern Ireland and a very wet start to Tuesday across western parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, for England and Wales, mostly dry through the night and turning quite cool across central and eastern England, with temperatures down to single figures. But plenty of sunshine here to start Tuesday. Much of eastern England will have a fine, bright and quite warm day tomorrow, whereas it's going to be a very wet start for Northern Ireland. The rain only slowly clearing here and lingering for much of the day in southwest Scotland. That rain could cause a few issues as it really builds up through the day. Turning wet in West Wales and the far southwest of England as well. And again, cool in the west, quite warm in the east, where we see the lengthiest spells of sunshine. That rain will continue to only trickle its way further eastwards as we head through Tuesday evening, and it's tied into an area of low pressure. You can see there the swirls of showers moving around that, and that's what we're in for during Wednesday and Thursday. Some heavy showers across the UK, turning a bit drier, certainly across the south for Friday and into the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. You're with GB News. Now, every day before the show, we delve into the stories making the headlines and those making a splash on social media. But because we don't have time to get into all the topics we need to talk about in detail, we're bringing you The Update, a roundup of burning issues that caught our eye. Oh, he loves breaking a bit of international law, doesn't he? And this time it's in the form of Boris imposing tariffs on steel from countries like India, Turkey and South Korea, as exists already on China, who have been dumping our markets with the stuff, meaning homegrown metal is way too pricey to buy. But the protectionist measure that a lot of people would support, given the dire state of the UK steel industry, could spark a trade war, as World Trade Organization rules would allow retaliatory tariffs. Ironically, on stuff like aerospace and cars, which use the very steel being imported from the East. Apparently, it's what caused ethics advisor Lord Geit to quit. Yet Labour back the move, a rarity in modern politics, suggesting Boris could well be on the right side of history with this one. That is, if he actually follows through. Now, a company you've probably never heard of, but with huge significance, could be closed and moved to China if the government allows a deal allowing China to buy it to go ahead. That's the warning of think tank Policy Exchange about Newport's wafer fab, which makes microchips for stuff like cars and smartphones and has been snapped up by Nexperia, a subsidiary of China's Wingtech technology. Beijing is hell-bent on monopolising the market for this specialist and crucial tech, as well as all the materials used to make it. So it's now up to Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng to kibosh the move to protect British interests. Nexperia say the takeover means they'll pump money into the British site to continue making the widgets here. But that doesn't stop them shanghaiing the copyrights and research, though, does it? Now, having ummed and ahed over the question on a Sunday politics show last year, Boris has finally decided only men can be born with male genitalia, deciding at last to come down on the right side of biology, most women, and recently, the International Swimming Governing Body. Finally, those at the top of government are starting to push back against radical trans lobbying. But it's a shame it took a world sporting body to enable the Prime Minister to figure out his own position on something increasingly critical to 50% of the population. Now, apparently, Britain has become the capital of fraud, with loads of you being ripped off left, right and centre by everything from faux Nigerian princes to super sophisticated scammers pretending to be your bank. 3/4 of the population have been targeted, making us the most attacked country, well beyond America and Canada, with almost 400,000 reports in the last year alone, costing the country £3 billion. Campaigners are demanding more be done to protect and help victims, like making social media companies responsible when their platforms are used, while only 1 in 1,000 cases end up with someone being charged. Meanwhile, cutting fraud by even less than a half would save the economy £55 billion a year. The final word of this hour goes back to Sean Bailey. Anything in there you want to riff on?
Fraud. Fraud is a third of all crime in London. The mayor utterly failed to do anything about it. We only have 300 police officers or 300 police personnel looking at fraud. Fraud is most people's experience of crime. I think it needs to be really risen up the list of things we deal with. But I do caution one thing, it is hard because many of the fraud attacks we suffer in this country are from outside of the country, so it's hard to pin down a particular criminal, but what we can do is educate the public. One of the worst fraud crimes I've ever heard of is people contacting young people, sometimes under the age of 12, and saying, can I use your bank account for a second? I'll give you £20 and I'll let you keep 10. And often they honour that, but they're money laundering. So your young person thinks, oh, I can get an extra £10 here. Their whole life is ruined. No mortgages, no job where there's any finance involved because they now have money laundering on their criminal record. Fraud is real. Fraud is only one step away from your own household. It is about enforcement, but it's also about education.
I did not know that one about young people and money laundering. Astonishing stuff. Thank you so much, Sean. Well, do stay tuned. That's the end of the first hour. Lots more coming up. Welcome back to a bumper 2-hour edition of We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. And here's what we've got coming up on the second half of the show. Ukraine's president has addressed world leaders at the G7 summit. President Zelensky has urged them to provide more help, not just weapons, but with Ukraine's wheat exports. Plus, we'll be discussing internet safety after a new study found that 2/3 of teenagers are exposed to harmful content online. And we're heading back to Wimbledon, where Emma Raducanu is expected on centre court. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to talk about? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon to you. It's just 1 minute past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. G7 leaders meeting in Germany say they'll continue to provide financial, humanitarian, military and diplomatic support to Ukraine and stand with the country for as long as it takes. It follows an address by the Ukrainian president via video link in which he asked for help with grain exports, reconstruction and military aid. EU diplomats say Volodymyr Zelensky also said he wants to end the war before winter sets in. Speaking from Bavaria, Boris Johnson told broadcasters Zelensky has no option but to continue to defend his country from Russian aggression. NATO is going to increase the number of its forces at high readiness from 40,000 to over 300,000. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg confirmed to reporters ahead of a NATO summit in Madrid later this week. He also says he expects allies to state that Russia poses a direct threat to security and rules-based international order.
We will agree a strengthened comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine. This will include substantial deliveries of support in areas like secure communications, anti-drone systems and fuel. Over the longer term, we will help Ukraine transition from Soviet-era military equipment to modern NATO equipment and further strengthen its defence and security institutions.
Barristers have gathered outside courts across England and Wales as thousands strike over legal aid funding. They're refusing to accept new cases or to step in for colleagues whose cases are overrunning. Some Crown courts have been forced to run limited services with criminal trials and other cases postponed or rescheduled. The body of a woman has been found in the wreckage of a house in Birmingham which was destroyed in a gas explosion last night. A man who was also rescued is in a life-threatening condition in hospital. Witnesses described finding the man trapped against a fridge before helping out on a mattress. Kira Parkinson's partner was one of those who helped.
We was at home, like everybody else. We just heard a massive bang. Everybody thought it was directly in their house. Obviously, as word got round, we knew what had actually gone on. My partner Callum came down because his friend's mum actually lives on this road. So he just came to see if they was okay. And then obviously once he got here, he just seen all the chaos basically. Callum and I'd say about 10 other men ran obviously in to obviously help and do what they could. They brought a man out on a mattress. I know they was willing to help a lady, but they couldn't actually get to the lady.
Boris Johnson says changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol could be implemented as early as this year. MPs are going to vote later on today on whether to give ministers powers to override parts of the post-Brexit trade deal. The Prime Minister says removing checks on goods travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland will help safeguard the Good Friday Agreement. DUP leader Sir Geoffrey Donaldson says he wants the bill to pass.
If the bill gets through all its common stages intact, then obviously we will consider what steps we can take in response to that. And I want to see the political institutions up and running as soon as possible, but it has to be on a sustainable basis. We have made clear that getting decisive action on the protocol, addressing the harm that the protocol is doing to Northern Ireland is very important to rebuild the cross-community consensus that is essential for power sharing to work.
Leaders in Scotland have been looking at ways to tackle an increase in protests outside of abortion clinics. Scottish Green MSP Gillian Mackay has proposed a bill to put a 150-metre buffer zone outside of clinics, aiming to prevent what she describes as intimidation and harassment. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, says today's event is an important opportunity to reaffirm women's autonomy and the right to choose.
I am very strongly pro a woman's right to choose, but I understand that people take a different view. But actually this is not just about that. This is about access to healthcare. We wouldn't tolerate for any other kind of healthcare people as they enter a hospital or a clinic being subject to intimidation and harassment, and we shouldn't tolerate it, in my view, for women accessing abortion services.
The Queen has travelled to Scotland for the royal family's traditional week of events. Her Majesty took part in the ceremony of the keys at the Palace of Holyrood House, accompanied by the Earl and Countess of Wessex. She was symbolically offered the key to the city of Edinburgh, but returned it, as tradition dictates, to be looked after by the city's elected officials. This is GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Alex, and we need to talk about.
Make no mistake, Russia is at war with the world. It may not be conventional war delivered through bombs and tanks, but a cruel game of psychological chess with international leaders, forcing them to choose between defending Ukraine or protecting the most vulnerable in their own countries from starvation and fuel poverty. It is also proving to be a Machiavellian strategy of divide and conquer, causing leaders to battle it out with one another based on how far they are prepared to go to face down Putin while inflicting acts of horrific national self-harm. Sending arms to Ukraine is one thing, sanctions quite the other, and over both, the Russian despot hangs a sword of Damocles. Help Ukraine and global food supplies run out in a month, triggering mass famines. Put one foot inside the war zone and our nukes are pointed at you. A protracted game of chicken is taking place with world leaders at odds over how to respond, meaning a big enough response to stop Putin is a long way off. A gamble he has taken and is so far winning, betting on the lack of vital unity. Well, the G7 summit this year needs to find answers, and quick. The question is, can it? Well, let's talk now to Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, former NATO commander and former Ministry of Defence Director General. Fantastic to have you on the show, Chris. It seems to me that so far the response has been enough to stop Putin making massive advancements, enough to keep Ukraine with their head above the water, but not enough to stop this war in its tracks, which potentially means a very long and protracted war. Does more need to be done?
I think you're right, Alex. You said it just now. What it needs is a comprehensive strategy that deals with Russia as the rogue pariah state that it is. I think we have to recognise that Russia in its present form is an existential threat to everything we hold dear in civilised democratic societies. And that means the whole of society has to be mobilised in response to it. The other thing we have to do is get the initiative from Putin. We are in a position of reacting all the time to what he does. We need to get onto the front foot and get him to react to what we're doing. That doesn't mean that NATO as a defensive alliance has to be aggressive. It just means it has to be more agile, it needs to be more inventive, and it needs to recognise the new power structures in the world.
Yet again, we've found some sanctions down the back of the sofa, it seems. And I think, though, it seems that, you know, the more we mete this out through sanctions, there's a backlash to those. There's real politic that kicks in about how things like the energy crisis are going to affect people at home. Surely what needs to happen is a hugely ramped up military response. But do we have the wherewithal and the weapons and resources to do that?
Yeah, we've got the weapons and resources. We just don't have them in the right place, and we don't have the right strategy at the moment. NATO's meeting shortly in Madrid. It's going to sort out a new strategy. What we haven't had in response to Russia's aggression is a strategy that recognises that quite a lot of our countries that are our allies, like the Baltic states, Denmark, the Nordic states, don't actually have the strategic depth to absorb a Russian punch. And the former tripwire policy, whereby if you attack some of our troops, aircraft or ships, then obviously we're going to respond, doesn't work anymore. I mean, Russia can be in all three Baltic state capitals in no time whatsoever. If we fight to recapture them, they're going to be devastated. So we've got to adopt a strategy that's more like Israel's, where Israel can't afford to fight on its own land. And that's going to take some time to work out, but it's going to fundamentally change the way we defend Europe in particular, and European and North American interests in the wider world.
Jens Stoltenberg today talking about making sure NATO-grade weaponry gets to Ukraine. But when you've got countries like Germany failing to deliver on promises that they would send big arms to Ukraine months ago, and then you've got people like Macron, who seems to be taking more conciliatory response, and Draghi of Italy, again, talking about whether or not Europe can afford a protracted war. Can the UK, with the support of America, go this alone and get those weapons to Ukraine for essentially a decisive end to this war?
There's no doubt that we can. I mean, the Americans, yet again, are proving to be the arsenal of democracy. And as Zelensky said, democracy has got to be better armed than totalitarianism. But I think France and Germany need to bear in mind that when Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, says he wants a security structure that goes all the way from Vladivostok to Lisbon, he means under Russian and Chinese domination. And I think if France and Germany think in trying to compromise today, they're dealing with the threats downstream, they're very much deluded. I think, as Winston Churchill said about appeasement, appeasement is what you do when you hope the crocodile eats you last. And I think France and Germany need to recognise that. It's realpolitik in the modern world. We're facing a totalitarian power that seeks to rub out our freedoms and also our way of life. It's an existential crisis. And unless France and Germany get on board with that, then they're going to be left behind.
Fascinating thoughts. Brilliant to have your insight. An honour to have you on the programme. Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, former NATO commander and former Ministry of Defence Director General. Well, joining me now on the show is General Sir Richard Barrons, former head of the UK Joint Forces Command. Great to have you on the show as well. I mean, Russia is at war with the globe, isn't it? It's using leverage with food shortages, energy crises, and yet the globe doesn't seem to have an answer to this. And as much as the West might do what they can to try and stop Putin in his tracks, it seems to me Russia is going to be continually funded by countries like India, like China. Will this just carry on for decades?
So I think the point you make is a very good one. Russia is in a confrontation with the West and at war with Ukraine. It's not really at war with the globe, because there are significant parts of the globe, as you described, China, possibly India, and a lot of other ambivalent countries in Asia and Africa, who are keeping out of this or are supporting Russia. So we need to see that this confrontation with Russia is existential for our security, our values, and our future prosperity. And there is every danger the confrontation will drag on forever unless the West takes the initiative and dictates the outcome to Russia. And we should bear in mind that we in the West, we are way, way richer and more powerful than Russia. And it is ridiculous that Russia thinks it has the initiative here. And now we need just to find the will, the strength and the endurance to make sure we prevail on our terms.
I mean, an extremely pressing concern is those supplies of food. You've got South Africa buying up fertiliser at a cost of price at the moment. But is there anything the West can do to get that grain out of Ukraine? I mean, in a realistic sense, there are landmines littered under the sea. There's a lot that falls on the side of Turkey to help us do that. What can we do to make sure that that food gets to the vulnerable countries that need it?
So here I think the key for the West is to put pressure on others in the world, I would say, including China and India and certainly Turkey, to bear down on Russia in order to get Russia to stand aside, for the Russian Baltic fleet to move away, to allow those nations that have the capability to clear the mines that would allow commercial shipping into Odessa, to make sure that commercial shipping has affordable insurance, to get the grain to hungry mouths, particularly in Africa and some parts of Asia. And we need to make sure that the blame for this not happening is absolutely placed at Russia's door. This isn't something the West caused in any way, and the rest of the world, whether they're neutral in this conflict or not, need to put pressure on Russia to make sure the blockade is lifted.
Is it not the situation, though, that certain countries are almost cynically profiting from this because all of a sudden they've got access to certain things from Russia that used to cost an arm and a leg and now are half price, and essentially enables them to think, well, we can play catch-up with the West?
Yes, it's an indication of a world that's splintering. I mean, Russia has spent most of the last 100 years or so gradually moving towards Europe, to becoming more European. And one of the clear effects of this invasion that it's imposed on Ukraine is that Russia, from a position of considerable subservience, is having to move towards Asia and become essentially a client of China. And of course, those big, powerful states, particularly India and China, they're going to take advantage of this because they've essentially got Russia over a barrel now.
And not just in terms of being able to buy stuff from Russia, but potentially also sell stuff to Russia as well. Where is Russia getting its weapons from? Is that going to run dry any moment soon?
It's a very interesting point, because every single missile that Russia has fired into Ukraine so far in this war has only arrived at its target courtesy of US and European technology that's in those missiles. So that supply is cut off. That means Russia has to rely on the stockpile that it has, and we don't know how big that is, but we might assume they've used perhaps half of it so far. But to replace particularly things like computer chips in the missiles they'll now want to make, they're going to have to go to other parts of the world, and generally that's not going to be as good. But they will establish other lines of supply, and it's another indication of the world splintering between liberal democracies on one hand and autocratic capitalists on the other. And this is a dispute that will dictate the rest of this century.
I mean, don't we therefore need to make sure that time is not on Russia's side to rearm? Are we being militarily forceful enough? Because it seems to me that with this drip of weapons being supplied, a drip of sanctions, another one pulled out the hat and you wonder why it wasn't put in place months ago, that Russia's able to constantly regroup. Do we now need, fire and brimstone or whatever to put Putin back in his place?
So we have a choice to make here. We could just give Ukraine a little bit of stuff, just enough for them to hold the line, but nothing like enough for them to shut the Russians out, in which case this conflict will go on for a very long time, certainly years, and it will create big question marks over the security of other countries, both in and outside of NATO. That's just not in our interest. If, however, we connect the Ukrainian will and their people, particularly their young men and women who are going to do the fighting, to our industry, particularly US industry and stockpiles, and training and money, then we can allow Ukraine to create the capability it needs to decisively take its territory back. This is probably, I don't think, until next year. And at the same time, whilst we're doing all of that, we continue to bear down on isolating and sanctioning Russia to deplete its ability and its will to continue. That way, we'll bring this war to a close quicker and on terms that are satisfactory to us. But hedging our bets and doing little bits and pieces now is a sure recipe for an indecisive outcome and a long and very tiresome stalemate.
It's perhaps one of the reasons that we're not doing what needs to be done to get this war finished is that Putin constantly bears down on military escalation with nuclear threats. Are we really worried about the rhetoric coming out of the Kremlin?
So I think several months into this war, we're wiser about two things. One is right now the Russian military is massively overstretched, doing a terrible job in Ukraine, and it's not really a cogent threat to NATO. But we should also recognize that having done so badly in this war, Russian military will reform after Ukraine, and we should be very worried about an angry, bitter and reformed Russian military between now and about 2032, I would say. So we need to recognize that Russia's conventional threat will change. And the nuclear threat outside Ukraine, I think most political leaders are beginning to say that's just rhetoric. It's clearly not in Russia's interest to elevate it to an actual nuclear war.
General Sir Richard Barrons, thank you so much for your insights. Fascinating to hear, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. Former head of UK Joint Forces Command. I mean, you've heard it there. Two really top experts in previously massively high positions of power, saying that this needs to be done hard and fast and sharp. The more we drag this out with bits and bobs, weapons here, sanctions there, Russia regroups. And yet no one seems to be backing us in that.
Let's take a step back and see who's leading us here. This is why I'm happy to vote to leave. The EU has absolutely no clue at all of what's going on. We are facing now an ideological war, essentially, with autocratic states, autocratic capitalist states versus the West. And while we have people like Germany and Macron, etc., asleep at the wheel, Russia will always win. Let's be clear, Russia's been outmanoeuvring the EU for many, many years. This is just the latest step in that process. We need to get over there now and end it very quickly and with some military might, not only to send a message to Russia, but also to send a message to China. We, for too long, have let them have their own way in the world. They've taken most of our technology through umpteen different poor business deals that we've signed, and we're now seeing those weapons pointed at us here in the West. We need to step up and we need to say to Russia, we've had enough, this is what's going to happen. And pretending we're going to let people join the EU, pretending they may or may not join NATO is not the way. The first thing we do, we go and get that grain and we militarily protect it. We go in with military weapons and we take it out to show Russia that we're no longer playing games. Because if Russia win this step, if they do what the French want to do, what Macron wants to do, and we somehow appease them and give them some land, that is the beginning of the end of the Western world. We must show people that we're prepared to defend ourselves physically, that being Ukraine, and also ideologically, that being a wider Western world.
Sean, thank you. Well, it's worth casting your eye, actually, over some of the international press. I've been doing it lately, and you'd be amazed to read some of the headlines in the French newspapers, the Italian newspapers, the German newspapers. A very different conversation to the one going on here. And it seems to me it's about time we just blasted them to pieces. The longer this war protracts, the more the EU are going to play themselves into a corner economically, and us with it. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, how people in Northern Ireland are dealing with the cost of living crisis. Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. A mix of sunshine and showers today, with the showers mostly this afternoon across the east, with a cool breeze for most parts of the UK. Low pressure is dominating this weather front, bringing the showers today, but more lurking out in the Atlantic. They'll bring more wet weather to western areas tomorrow. But for the time being, the rain is clearing from the west. Some heavy downpours earlier for northwest England and southwest Scotland, but turning a bit drier here this afternoon. Not completely dry, still one or two showers, but the main focus for showers, of course, eastern England and northeast Scotland, where some heavy thundery downpours are possible. Much of South Wales, southwest England, Northern Ireland, dry and bright through the afternoon, but not particularly warm. We could just squeak into the low 20s across the east. Quite a cool breeze, especially on western coasts. The showers in the east will keep going well into the evening across Aberdeenshire, Norfolk too, but tending to clear away, and then that next weather system that we saw earlier pushes in from the west, turning into a pretty wet night for Northern Ireland and a very wet start to Tuesday across western parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, for England and Wales, mostly dry through the night and turning quite cool across central and eastern England, with temperatures down to single figures. But plenty of sunshine here to start Tuesday. Much of eastern England will have a fine, bright and quite warm day tomorrow, whereas it's going to be a very wet start for Northern Ireland. The rain only slowly clearing here and lingering for much of the day in southwest Scotland. That rain could cause a few issues as it really builds up through the day. Turning wet in West Wales and the far southwest of England as well. And again, cool in the west, quite warm in the east, where we see the lengthiest spells of sunshine. That rain will continue to only trickle its way further eastwards as we head through Tuesday evening, and it's tied into an area of low pressure. You can see there the swirls of showers moving around that, and that's what we're in for during Wednesday and Thursday. Some heavy showers across the UK, turning a bit drier, certainly across the south for Friday and into the weekend. We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. The cost of living is still rising at an alarming rate. Fuel and food are at the top of the inflationary table, and prices look set to climb further in the next few months. To find out more about what's happening to food costs and the reason behind the increases, our Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie has been following the links in our food chain.
When your food costs continually rise, your economy has a real problem. Here at the cattle market, the building blocks of our food go under the hammer. The auctioneer is putting through animals that are at the end of their dairy life. Their milk yield is down, they're not producing any more calves. This is the type of stuff that will go into ready meals, processed food, and even now, this is going for up to $1.90 a kilo. This price would have been near the cost of quality beef just a short while ago. Agriculture Minister Edwin Poots says it's the cost of fuel that's driving prices high.
Well, the last time we had a spike in oil prices was in 2008, when oil went to $145 a barrel, and at that stage fuel was around $1.20 a litre. Agricultural fuel was less than 50 pence a litre. We now have a situation where oil is $120 a barrel, and yet fuel is around £2 a litre and agricultural fuel around $1.30 a litre. So oil is a big issue here. It's driving up the cost of fertiliser, it's driving up the cost of other inputs such as meal, and consequently that will drive up all food costs.
Colin McKee is a businessman that is trying to produce quality and quantity and keeping costs down by going from farm gate to plate.
We farm here. We finish cattle. We finish lambs. We work with chickens. We don't keep our own hens. So we are really producing from the farm to the shop, to the table.
Continental cattle such as Charlies, Limousines or Belgian Blues produce better beef weights, but need barley or grain as opposed to grass to bring them to their full potential. Scenes like this used to be commonplace across the UK. Barley was one of the most stable diets for finishing off high-yielding beef cattle. But cheap imports of grain and wheat from outside the EU allowed feed manufacturers to produce much more cost-effectively.
The UK is not self-sufficient in terms of grain, so it's going to be important from Canada, North America, Ukraine and Brazil. So that's still going to be needed.
There's deer feed going into cattle that were deer bought, and then that's going to be slaughtered and then put into a shop. It's going to be expensive, you know, and it's getting the customer, are they going to be able to afford to buy it?
An economy such as the UK, with its own currency and fiscal levers, may be more nimble in the global markets. But to take full advantage, it must have control of its own raw materials. Doogie Beattie, GB News.
I mean, Sean, we're in a pickle when it comes to food supplies because we've been paying farmers to do everything but farm, haven't we?
Exactly. Look, as you can imagine, I'm no farmer. But what I would suggest is the more of our own food we produce, the better. You cut down the mileage, you give us some control. And the unfortunate thing about food costs and fuel costs going up, that drives the costs of everything. Because sometimes when we talk about cost of living, I wonder if there's people profiteering here. But when fuel costs go up, it costs more to produce almost everything.
You're not the only one who wonders that as well. Not enough people talking about that, actually. We'll discuss that next time you're on. You're at GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, a study has found that 2/3 of teens are experiencing harmful behaviour online. I'll be asking what can be done. Now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
Good afternoon. It is 3:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. G7 leaders meeting in Germany say they'll continue working together to meet Ukraine's needs for military and defence equipment. Well, there was an address this morning by the Ukrainian president via video link in which he asked the leaders for help with grain exports, reconstruction and military aid. EU diplomat Volodymyr Zelensky also said he wants to end the war before winter sets in. NATO will increase the number of its forces at high readiness from 40,000 to over 300,000. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg confirmed this to reporters ahead of a NATO summit in Madrid later this week. He also says he expects allies to state that Russia poses a direct threat to security and the rules-based international order. Barristers have gathered outside courts across England and Wales as they strike over legal aid funding. They're refusing to accept new cases or step in for colleagues whose cases are overrunning. The Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, says the strikes are regrettable and will only delay justice for victims. A summit's taking place in Scotland to look at ways to tackle an increase in protests outside of abortion clinics. The Scottish Green MSP, Gillian Mackay, has proposed a bill to put a 150-metre buffer zone outside of clinics, aiming to prevent what she describes as intimidation and harassment. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says today's event is an important opportunity to reaffirm women's autonomy and their right to choose. The Queen's travelled to Scotland for the royal family's traditional week of events. Her Majesty took part in the ceremony of the Keys at the Palace of Holyrood House, accompanied by the Earl and Countess of Wessex. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Shortly we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.228 to the dollar and it's 1.161 to the euro. The price of gold currently stands at £1,487.94 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. App
absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, it's hardly news to anyone that the internet is a cesspit of abuse. Yet nothing is ever done about it. A Wild West parallel virtual world, increasingly sucking people into a faux reality of bitter extremes and unregulated behaviours. Well, it's now seeing 2/3 of teens experiencing harms online. Tick-Tock has been forced to remove 91 million videos last year alone, while Meta acted on 153 million pieces of harmful content on Facebook. And that was the stuff that was caught. It is clear that today children are more at risk online than in the so-called real world. The government is currently working on probably one of the most important pieces of legislation in modern history, the Online Safety Bill, which will regulate the internet for the very first time since the 1990 Computer Misuse Act, drawn up before any of the big dot-coms even existed. But with all the constant talk of free speech, will the bill have the guts or the teeth to crack down to prevent online harms spiralling out of control? Well, let's talk now to the behavioural psychologist, Jo Hemmings. Jo, I often look at things like social media and think it's actually getting to the stage of a public health crisis. What is going on? How bad is it out there for young people?
Hi, Ellie. I think it's important to stress that this Ofcom campaign is about empowering young people themselves to report if they find content distressing, hurtful, it makes them anxious. So, look, a similar number, 2/3 of teens actually said that they got a positive experience generally out of using the internet. So it's not all bad out there. But definitely there are things that they're seeing, viewing, that they don't like, and they're not really saying much about it. They're not perhaps telling an adult, they're not sharing it with somebody, and they're not reporting it. So this is really about encouraging them. If they find something be different for different individuals, they find something, hate crimes, abuse, something threatening or intimidating, that they should be able to report what they're seeing and sort of feel confident that they'll get some sort of result out of reporting it.
Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. What sort of things are we talking about? And is it the fact that a lot of stuff online that just wouldn't happen in the real world is getting scarily normalised?
I think to a degree that's true. I mean, what you don't want to happen with these, 13 to 17-year-olds and a little bit older is them to get desensitized to this sort of material or to find it acceptable, because that we're going into scary territory there for their emotional development moving forward. So it's certain things like violence, it's hate crimes, it's misinformation, It's that sort of thing. Anything that they find personally that is distressing or they don't like, the temptation is just to ignore it. And I guess what we're trying to do here with this campaign is to say, you can be heard. You may not be an influencer as such, but your voice does have some influence, which perhaps will prevent other young people from seeing the same thing.
I mean, talking about influence of things, it seems to me there's something else going on beyond the violence and the hate crimes, the misinformation, and that's the pernicious creep of influence on young people for particular social trends, such as gender dysphoria, for example, becoming almost fashionable. Is that something as well that we need to be aware of when it comes to young people and the sort of content they're ingesting on a regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So there is something fashionable, and it's a horrible word, about certain activities. For an example, let's say self-harm. You will see people putting up, avoiding current regulations, but still managing to draw people in and talking about things like self-harm and almost making it something that young people want to do because it seems fashionable. That's really worrying. And that's the sort of thing, again, I feel, it's difficult when you're 13, 14, 15, I know, to be bold enough to say, I don't like this, I don't want to be part of it. But if it's making you feel uncomfortable and you feel it's wrong, then I think, this is where we're trying to encourage and empower young people to say, I don't like it, this shouldn't be on here. I shouldn't be having to see this. I should be having a really positive experience of, my online world. Having said that, as I say, 2/3 do feel it's positive, and we're not trying to sanitize the online world, just make it protect our children, I suppose, a little bit from what's out there.
Jo Hemmings, behavioural psychologist, thank you ever so much. Sean, God, I could riff on this for ages. I'm convinced, actually, especially when you look over the pond, the birthplace of social media in America, that it creates mass hysteria. It seems to be making all of society mentally ill. I'd shut the whole lot down.
Listen, I don't want to agree with you, but I do. Let me say, about the campaign is great, but the first question I ask myself as a parent is, where are the adults in the room? For me, that's too late. I don't want my children to have seen something distressing and then let me know. We need to shut it down. And the notion that free speech means that we should let it be the wild, wild west and run the risk of our children coming across it, I think is just too much. And this bill, I think they need to give this bill the maximum amount of teeth. It would be better to get this bill to be overzealous than it would to be underzealous, for want of a term. We must give it some teeth, because I do a lot of work with young people, and a young boy said this to me. When I say young boy, he's 19 years old. He said to me, look, if you haven't seen enough porn and violence by the time you're 21, we could sit you in a room and play it to you for hours. But if you've seen too much, we can't take it away. The effect of it he was referring to. And that's my worry. I think we let our children see too much. They become desensitized. So they're not even reporting now. They think it's normal.
Yeah, let's make sure that bill is super gnarly. Thank you, Sean. Well, normally when cases packed with millions of dollars of banknotes are handed over, it's for something highly nefarious. It's also not the usual way charities get their cash donations beyond collection jars or coin buckets. But that's allegedly the way Prince Charles took receipt of a massive wad of support from a former Qatari Prime Minister of €3 million, stuffed in a suitcase and carrier bags from Fortnum & Mason. The watchdog, the Charity Commission, is now considering whether to conduct a review. Well, let's talk first to GB News royal reporter Cameron Walker. Cameron, it's a fascinating story, super surprising. What's the latest?
It certainly is, Alex. Well, the Sunday Times reports that the Prince personally accepted €3 million worth of cash donations from the former Prime Minister of Qatar, €1 million of which was allegedly handed to him at Clarence House in a suitcase. Now, Clarence House says that the donations passed to the Prince were immediately passed on to his charity, the Prince of Wales Charitable Fund, and all appropriate governance was followed at all times. But I think perhaps what's not sitting well with people, Alex, is the fact that it was handed over in a suitcase. But it isn't actually illegal to accept cash donations, and Clarence House says that all correct processes were followed at all times. So there's nothing to suggest here that it is illegal, and the money would have been used as part of his charity, the Prince of Wales Charitable Fund, to transform lives and build sustainable futures.
And I see you're in Edinburgh there, and there's news that the Queen is likely to be in Scotland for the rest of the week. Tell us about that.
Yes, Her Majesty the Queen is in residence behind me at Holyrood House here in Edinburgh. She was accompanied today, this morning, in a ceremony of the keys by the Earl and Countess of Wessex. And it's a ceremony attended by the Lord Provost of the city, where she's kind of symbolically handed the keys to the city of Edinburgh. And due to those kind of mobility issues that Her Majesty has experienced over the last few months, it was actually uncertain whether Her Majesty would indeed attend today. But this afternoon we have heard that Her Majesty is expected to attend another engagement here in Scotland tomorrow, and that is in the gardens of Holyrood House behind me, where she's going to be celebrating her Platinum Jubilee with all three armed forces, so Royal Navy, Royal Air Force and British Army. They will be in attendance. The rest of the royal family are going to be undertaking engagements during Royal Week here in Scotland. There will be a garden party attended by the Prince of Wales and as well as the Earl and Countess of Wessex and the Princess Royal. There'll also be an investiture carried out by the Princess Royal tomorrow and a couple more engagements before Her Majesty goes up to Balmoral in Aberdeenshire for her annual summer break.
Cameron, thank you so much for the right royal update there. Well, it's the first day of Wimbledon, and guess what? Rain has stopped play. But there is on-court action expected later for the big British tennis stars Raducanu and Murray, and all eyes will be on the former Kent schoolgirl as and when she steps out onto central court. The phenomenon of her passage from the last 16 seeded players to Grand Slam made her an overnight sporting megastar, followed by winning the US Open a few weeks later. Now, the teenager is the talk of SW19 as Brits long for the crowning of a homegrown tennis champ. Joining us now is our reporter Ellie Costello. Ellie, what's the latest in Wimbledon? It was thunder and rain last time you checked in. Has that stopped?
Hi, Alex. Yes, it was threatening a washout about an hour ago. I know that a few of the games were delayed for a few minutes there whilst the rain beat down on the players. But thankfully, the sun has come out for us again. I just think it's one of those days and games have continued. A huge buzz here at Wimbledon. The first time it's been back to full capacity in 3 years. Obviously, the championships were cancelled in 2020 down to the pandemic. Last year, they were at 50% capacity, and this year it really was Wimbledon back to its finest hour. There were people queuing on Wimbledon Common in the famous queue at 4 a.m. this morning. Many of them had come overnight and they'd put up tents. I was speaking to some of them this morning with their Pims and their blankets and their newspapers. It really was a very British affair. Many people just so pleased to be back. Obviously, lots of eyes on Emma Raducanu, who will be playing after Novak Djokovic. He's currently on centre court. He is winning against Kwon Sang Woo, but he is putting up quite a fight, the South Korean there. So we'll see what happens with Novak Djokovic. But eyes will be on Emma Raducanu, 19-year-old British superstar, 12 months after her fantastic display at the US Open. So many people hoping she can go all the way here and win Wimbledon. How fantastic would that be after 3 years away? And later on this evening, Alex, Sir Andy Murray as well. So an absolute legend of Wimbledon. So many people very much looking forward to that. Of course, not without its controversy. We know that Russian and Belarusian players have been banned from Wimbledon this year because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Many high-profile players have come out and said that that's unfair on those individual players. But that is what's happened here this year. But there is so much to look forward to, Alex, and that's certainly the feeling here. Very much looking forward to 10 days of spectacular tennis here at Wimbledon.
Well, you're looking wonderful in your Wimbledon whites there, Ellie. Thank you so much for the update. Have a glorious time out there. Glad the sun's shining. Sean, it's funny, we were discussing earlier, weren't we, off camera, about this juxtaposition. We've got this heroine here in the form of Emma Raducanu, taxi driver's daughter, and yet Wimbledon plays host to this conveyor belt of celebs, you know, posing in their boxes at Central Court, and it just feels a bit wrong, doesn't it?
What I didn't say earlier on, because I thought it was a little bit rude, when I grew up, I'm born and bred in London, we always thought Wimbledon was for posh people. And we used to see this very big push to get a Wimbledon champion. And my friend used to say to me all the time, if the likes of us played tennis, Sean, we'd have won it 20 times over. But look, it's such a great institution. And I believe over the years, it has slightly become more open. And if you see what grassroots tennis is trying to do, it's definitely trying to become a thing of the people. They've got a long way to go. It's still not like football. But I do believe if they keep that push, A, they'll get more people interested in tennis in general, and B, it'll make the whole sort of access to Wimbledon, who's interested, and make it much more broad appeal.
Yeah, Emma Raducanu embodies that really, doesn't she?
Yes, she's been wonderful. But I worry about the pressure on her. Young sporting star, the ache people have to see a female British Wimbledon champion is so huge. If she does it, she'll go down in history. But if she falters, I hope they're kind to her.
Yeah, she's a young'un. Well, I'm just back from a weekend of camping in the glorious New Forest. Who knew that Narnia actually exists? The wonder of wild horses, a local farmer regaling drinkers with the story of his dead donkey down the Royal Oak, and my other half sinking in a bog in his fancy Italian jeans. It was the stuff of British joy. Everything that is good and right about the world. Well, to puncture my smugness in my post-mini break glow, here is everything utterly wrong with it. It's time for the Alex Agenda. Well, if the photo of the G7 leaders sitting around that table like a Fleetwood Mac tribute act waiting to go on stage at Edinburgh Town Hall wasn't enough to make you gip, the wags of world leaders having their muesli together before going alpine trekking is bound to bring up your breakfast. In a world where millions of women and children have been forced from their homes in Ukraine and are set to starve to death across the Sahel amidst global food shortages, the press call of the useless arm trophies of important men solving the world's problems instead of going on a nice little mountain hike, all toothsome smiles, makes me wonder if we're stuck in 1920. Make sure you're home in time, ladies, to give the president a back rub and draw his bath. So, Kendrick Lamar came on stage dressed like rapping Jesus at Glastonbury to extol women's rights by jumping on the topic of the day, abortion. First, Jesus, who totes was the world's first and best feminist, probably didn't call his female followers bitches, rats and hoes. Second, a lot of the anti-abortion lot are literally quoting chunks of the Bible. I'm all for men stepping up and helping women out in a world that is increasingly dangerous. But opportunistic so-called conscientious rappers like Lamar don't seem to be calling out hip-hop culture that constantly glorifies treating women like pieces of meat, yet are happy to make millions of pounds out of it. Sheffield Hallam University has dropped its English literature course because apparently it's a low-value degree that doesn't lead to getting a job. Oi, I studied literature. But I guess with the constant push to decolonise the curriculum, turn everything in the arts into one giant woke workshop and no longer expect people to even be able to spell their own name, it's no surprise. I suppose fashion communication and immersive arts are the big hitters. Although I do totally see the point in their airport management course. Could do with a bit of that these days. Perhaps the would-be Woodhouses can all become baggage handlers, now that words are considered passé. All right, Sean, anything there you want to sink your teeth into?
Dropping the English course, I'm pretty stunned by that. And if I was to sit on their board, I'd say what other courses would be running? I don't want to see any nonsense like Viking studies or any of that nonsense. If you're going to drop an English course, I think you need to take a real look at yourself. That ability to converse, to capture what's going on in that part of history is vital. And actually, the most useful young people, the most dangerous young people in the right way are young people who can express themselves, both in the spoken and the written word. So I'd have thought very long and very hard before I dropped that course.
Now, talking about people who can express themselves, Kendrick Lamar, fantastic rapper, but do you find something jarring about him coming on stage talking about abortion rights when hip-hop culture seems to be anything but pro-women?
What I find is, this for me is where the left are. So what the left do, they pick their demons. I remember people supporting Stormzy, nobody's looked at what, rappers like Ice Cube might have said in the past. They're off limits. But anybody else in politics, for instance, just mention something and they get absolutely rounded on. And my grandmother used to say something about outrage. She used to say, if the outrage is intermittent or indiscriminate, it's not real.
Love it. Sean, thank you so much. Well, that's Sean's thoughts on things, and you've been sending your emails throughout the show today as well. And on the G7 summit, Keith says Boris Johnson is a complete idiot getting involved in a war that has absolutely nothing to do with Britain, sending them 500 million in aid while Britons are starving and can't afford the basics. Keith, don't think I agree with you there. Edward says India needs to say that if Germany end their reliance on Russian fuel, they will also. Otherwise, billions per day will continue to be paid to Russia from Germany, enhancing Russia's finance to keep the war going. Lots of people there actually would be agreeing with you on that one. Time to stop funding Putin. That's almost it from me. Coming up, Patrick Christys is filling in for Colin Brazier, and he's with me now.
Yes.
Paddy, what have you got coming up on the show, youngster?
Well, I've got absolutely loads, actually. I mean, it's good as well because I think the Brazier show is basically pretty much the only one I've not done on this channel yet, so I'm quite lucky to ticking this box off. But yes, there's loads to get stuck into. The G7 latest, of course, what's going on in Ukraine, whether or not people are making the right decisions. Is Boris Johnson spending enough time actually at home as well? He kind of ditched a big northern meet-up and went off to Kiev. Now he's at the G7, of course. Should he be shoring up everything at home? I get stuck right into the British Council as well. I don't think they're particularly British, and I think they should stop being a council as well, because taxpayers are funding them to the tune of tens of millions a year, so they can put us in the same bracket as places like Afghanistan and Sudan when it comes to racism. We've got all of that and much, much more across the show. So, yeah, tune in 4 till 6.
I just wonder if you're going to be the next person to go on strike with the amount of hours you do. You must be the hardest working broadcaster in Britain.
Thing
and
is,
the amount of time
really
before they
enjoy my
change
job,
the station
so no.
to Patrick Telly.
No, I just, I couldn't go on strike because then I'd stop doing the thing that I love most.
And we love it as well.
A terrible reason to go on strike.
Thank you, Patrick. Do stay tuned in for the wonderful Patrick Christys. That's all I've got time for now. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News. Same time, same place, 2 o'clock tomorrow. It is, of course, Patrick next. But first, it's the weather forecast.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. A mix of sunshine and showers today, with the showers mostly this afternoon across the east, with a cool breeze for most parts of the UK. Low pressure is dominating this weather front, bringing the showers today, but more lurking out in the Atlantic. They'll bring more wet weather to western areas tomorrow. But for the time being, the rain is clearing from the west. Some heavy downpours earlier for northwest England and southwest Scotland, but turning a bit drier here this afternoon. Not completely dry, still 1 or 2 showers, but the main focus for showers was eastern England and northeast Scotland, where some heavy thundery downpours are possible. Much of South Wales, southwest England, Northern Ireland, dry and bright through the afternoon, but not particularly warm. We could just squeak into the low 20s across the east. Quite a cool breeze, especially on western coasts. The showers in the east will keep going well into the evening across Aberdeenshire, Norfolk too, but tending to clear away, and then that next weather system that we saw earlier pushes in from the west, turning into a pretty wet night for Northern Ireland and a very wet start to Tuesday across western parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, for England and Wales, mostly dry through the night and turning quite cool across central and eastern England, with temperatures down to single figures. But plenty of sunshine here to start Tuesday. Much of eastern England will have a fine, bright and quite warm day tomorrow, whereas it's going to be a very wet start for Northern Ireland. The rain only slowly clearing here and lingering for much of the day in southwest Scotland. That rain could cause a few issues as it really builds up through the day. Turning wet in West Wales and the far southwest of England as well. And again, cool in the west, quite warm in the east, where we see the lengthiest spells of sunshine. That rain will continue to only trickle its way further eastwards as we head through Tuesday evening, and it's tied into an area of low pressure. You can see there the swirls of showers moving around that, and that's what we're in for during Wednesday and Thursday. Some heavy showers across the UK, turning a bit drier, certainly across the south for Friday and into the weekend.
I'm Darren McCaffrey, and join me on The Briefing Monday to Thursday at 3 p.m. You'll get your afternoon fix of all the latest political stories, debate and analysis, as well as interviews with some of the biggest names in UK politics.
It's a problem that affects the whole world, Darren.
From Westminster to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, if it's happening in UK politics, we've got it covered. That's The Briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey, Monday to Thursday, 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest, and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.